The city of Constantinople in the year 541 stood as the pinnacle of human achievement. Capital of the Byzantine Empire, home to 500,000 souls, it possessed what no other settlement on earth could claim. Running water delivered through massive aqueducts, public baths that could accommodate thousands, fountains flowing in every square, and harbors where grain ships from 3 continents unloaded daily. This was not merely a city. This was proof that civilization had conquered chaos. The people who lived within its walls believed themselves protected by stone, by organization, by the infrastructure their empire had built. They were wrong. In the spring of that year, grain ships arrived from Egypt as they always did, their holds packed with wheat to feed the imperial capital. The longshoremen who unloaded these vessels noticed nothing unusual. But in the dark spaces between sacks, passengers had made the journey north. Rats, carriers of fleas, themselves carriers of something humanity had never encountered before. Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that would soon be called simply the plague. The first deaths came quietly. A dock worker here, a warehouse keeper there, a family near the port district. The symptoms were terrifying. Swellings in the groin and armpits, dark buboes that grew to the size of apples, fever that burned away rational thought, skin that blackened as if the body were rotting from within. Physicians applied their learning, bleeding patients, prescribing herbs, offering prayers. Nothing worked. Within days of the first symptoms, the afflicted were dead. Within weeks, those isolated cases had become hundreds. Constantinople was designed for public gathering. Its aqueducts carried water into the heart of the city, feeding public fountains where citizens collected their daily supply. The baths remained centers of social life, where people came to wash, to conduct business, to see and be seen. Markets thrived in the open air, bodies pressed close as merchants called out their wares. The city's very sophistication transformed these gathering points into channels of transmission. People washed their faces in fountain water that dozens had touched that morning. They bathed in pools where the sick had soaked hours before. They bought food from vendors whose hands were already infected. The fleas that carried the bacterium moved through crowded streets with ease, jumping from body to body in the press of the markets, in narrow lanes where neighbors lived wall to wall, in churches where the frightened gathered to pray. Water, that symbol of Byzantine achievement, became a medium of death. Every fountain, every public bath became a point where contamination spread. By summer, the plague had reached every quarter of the city, from the slums near the harbors to the palace itself. The dead accumulated faster than the living could process them. Families stacked corpses in their homes, unable to find burial space. The city hired grave diggers at premium wages, but still there were not enough hands. The authorities commandeered the towers of the city walls, packing them with bodies. When those filled, they turned to the sea. Ships that once carried grain now carried the dead, rowed out beyond the harbor to dump their cargo into the water. Thousands of bodies consigned to the waves because the earth could not hold them all. The smell of death hung over Constantinople like a fog. 5,000 dead per day at the peak, according to the historian Procopius, who witnessed these events, a rate of death that exceeded human capacity to respond with dignity. The markets stood empty, the baths closed, the machinery of the city began to falter, bakers died, and bread grew scarce. Farmers refused to bring produce into a city of pestilence. Ships stopped coming to the harbors. The food supply contracted to almost nothing. People who survived the plague faced starvation. Even Emperor Justinian fell ill. The swellings appeared. The fever came. For days, the question hung over the city: if the plague could reach the emperor himself, then who was safe? The answer was no one. The plague recognized no rank, no wealth, no devotion. It moved according to laws that would not be understood for more than 1,000 years. In the streets, those who remained healthy moved like ghosts through a necropolis. They avoided bodies lying in doorways, gave wide berth to carts collecting the dead. Fear replaced community. Families barricaded themselves in their homes, refusing to open doors even when friends begged for help. The sick were abandoned, not from cruelty, but from desperate logic. To help was to risk infection. Some fled the city, carrying the plague with them to towns that had thought themselves safe. Others remained, either from duty or paralysis, or because there was nowhere to go. The plague had already spread along the trade routes, following the paths that connected the empire's cities. What began in a grain ship from Egypt would, within years, reach Britain and Persia, would claim tens of millions of lives, would alter European history by weakening Byzantium at the moment of its greatest expansion. For those living through it in Constantinople, there was no understanding of pandemic. There was only the present horror, the daily discovery of new dead, the realization that survival had nothing to do with virtue or strength. The young and healthy died as quickly as the old. The wealthy perished alongside the poor. Physicians who treated the sick succumbed at higher rates than those they tried to save. Randomness governed everything. When Justinian recovered, against probability, the city began accounting for what had been lost. Perhaps half the population was dead. Entire neighborhoods stood silent, their inhabitants gone. The forums and markets that had thrived with commerce remained vacant. The empire itself was weakened, its armies reduced, its tax base devastated, its ambitions of reconquest fatally compromised. The plague had accomplished what no enemy army could have. It had brought the greatest city in the world to its knees without siege or battle. This was the plague of Justinian, the first pandemic recorded in sufficient detail for us to reconstruct its progression. The people of Constantinople did not know they were dying from bacteria. They had no concept of germs or vectors or infection chains. They could not see the fleas that carried death, could not understand how their beloved public baths and fountains, their dense markets and communal spaces had amplified the spread. They built a magnificent city with the best knowledge of their age, and that city became a crucible of plague. Constantinople survived, rebuilt itself, continued as the capital for another 900 years, but it would never again reach the population it held before the spring of 541. The plague returned in waves over the next 2 centuries, each outbreak killing thousands more. The warning was clear that civilization and pestilence could coexist, that cities themselves could become vectors, that the very achievements that allowed humans to live together in unprecedented numbers also created ideal conditions for epidemics to spread. It was a warning the world would ignore again and again for the next 1500 years.